check on some things. Definitely need to get rid of these. You know what we're doing tonight? Let me pull up, see if I can find the key tapping noises I used last time. Office sound 2 hours. Can turn that down a bit. Beep. True as fuck. Alright, let's hit it. Back into the bathtub we go. That's gotta make a pleasant sound. Chapter 3. It looked like lunch hour. Officers, clerks, secretaries, everyone flocked to the elevators. I fell in with the largest group and was soon riding down, away from the scene of the crime. The farther the better. Lunch wasn't very good. A limp salad, leathery roast beef, the usual mashed potatoes, vile coffee as black as tar. No one paid. Fortunately, there was no conversation, not even about the food. They were all busy solving puzzles instead. Crosswords and word ladders, anagrams and cryptograms, brain teasers and riddles. To avoid calling attention to myself, I scribbled something on a scrap of paper I found in my pocket. After an hour of this, I elbowed my way back into the hall. Now people were returning to work, taking the elevators up. The crowd was thinning fast. I had to find some place to go to, so I jumped on one of the last elevators and got out of the first stop. The hall here, like all the others I'd seen so far, had no windows. Rows of gleaming white doors stretched out on either side with milky globes over the door signs. 76-947, 76-948, 76-950. I stopped. That number, that same number. How did I, wandering aimlessly, happen to return exactly to this spot? Behind that door, if they hadn't discovered it yet, was a body propped up at a desk, a pair of twisted gold spectacles perched on its nose. What is that noise? Someone was coming. It took considerable effort not to break into a run. A tall officer without a cap came around the corner. I stepped aside to let him pass, but he walked up to me with a vague smile. "Step this way, please," he said in a lowered voice, indicating the door next to the one with the body. I don't understand," I said, lowering my voice. "There must be some mistake." "Oh, no, there's no mistake. In here, please." He opened the door, and I found myself in a bright yellow office. Other than a desk and a few telephones and chairs, there was no office equipment. I stayed near the door. The officer closed it quietly and walked around me. "Won't you have a seat?" You know who I am?" I asked slowly. "Of course." He nodded, bringing me a chair. What is there to talk about?" "I understand you perfectly. Let me assure you that I'll do everything in my power to keep this strictly confidential." "Confidential? What do you mean?" He came so close that I could feel his breath on my face. Our eyes met. "You see, you're working, how should I put it, outside the plan." He said in a barely audible whisper, "Actually, I should keep out of your way, not interfere. On the other hand, it might be better if I gave you some... that is, if I tell you in private, of course. Well, it might avoid needless complications." "I have nothing to say," I replied, on my guard. It wasn't the tone of his voice or what he said that gave me hope, but his strikingly unmilitary manner. Unless this was a plan to allay my suspicions, in which case... "I see," he said after a long pause. There was a note of desperation in his voice. He ran a hand through his hair. Under similar circumstances, on such an assignment, every officer would do the same. "Yet sometimes, for the sake of the service, of course, one may make an exception." I looked him in the eye. He winced. Very well, I said, taking a seat and resting my fingertips on the desk. Tell me what you think I ought to know. Oh, thank you, thank you. I won't beat around the bush. Your orders came from high up. Now, I'm not supposed to know about any change in those orders, not officially. But, well, you know how it is. There are always leaks. Why, you yourself? He waited for some word from me, a sign, a wink, anything, but I sat there like a statue. Finally, he blurted out, his face pale and his eyes shining feverishly. Listen, that old man had been working for them for some time. When I unmasked him and he confessed, instead of turning him over to DS according to the rules, I decided to keep him in the same position. They still considered him their agent, but he was really working for us. One of their couriers was recently sent to meet him, so I laid a trap. Except that instead of the courier, you showed up, and... He shrugged. Wait a minute, he was working for us? Of course, thanks to me. DS would have done the same, of course, but that way the matter would have gone out of our hands. I mean, my department, though it was I who unmasked him, and someone else would have gotten the credit. Of course, that's not why I did it. Don't misunderstand me. I only wanted to expedite matters. For the sake of the service, of course. Of course. But why did he poison himself? He took you for that courier. He thought you knew about his betrayal. He was only a pawn, after all. Yeah. Yes, it's really quite simple. I went beyond the limits of my authority when I made the decision to keep him, so they sent you to the old man to get back at me. A typical ploy. But wait, I stumbled into that room by accident. The officer shook his head and gave a sad smile. How could you have known what waited in the other rooms? You mean... His words conjured up an image of a long line of identical old men, each with white hair, pink scalp, and gold spectacles, each waiting patiently at his desk, smiling. An endless gallery of neat, brightly lit rooms. I shuddered. Then it wasn't only in that room. Naturally, we can't afford to take risks. Then, in the other rooms, the same thing? He nodded. And all the others? Substitutes, of course. Working for us and for them, you know how it is. But we keep a close watch. For us, they work harder. Wait a minute. What was it the old man was babbling about? Operational plans. Millions of variants of the original. A password. You didn't recognize it because it was their code. He thought you were pretending not to understand, which would mean you knew all about his defection. After all, everyone wears portable decoders. He unbuttoned his shirt and showed me a flat device strapped to his chest. Now I remembered how one of the officer who had talked to me in an elevator suddenly pressed his hand to his heart. You mentioned a ploy. Whose ploy? He turned pale. The eyelids flickered and fell. For a few minutes, he sat with his eyes shut. Someone high up, he whispered. Someone very high up, aimed at me, but I swear I'm innocent. If you could use your influence and what? Get them to drop this matter? I would be glad to... He didn't finish. He made a careful examination of my face. The whites of those staring eyes were wide and glassy. His nervous fingers pulled at his uniform. 967 by 18 by 439, he pleaded with me. I was silent. 411, 6,894 by 3... Come on, how about it? No? 45? Oh, all right, 70. He was on his knees. His voice shook. I said nothing. White as a sheet, he got up. 19. One last try. It sounded almost like a moan, but I said nothing. Slowly, he unbuttoned his jacket. So that's how it is, he said. I understand. 16. Very well. In accordance with... You'll excuse me. He went to the next room. Wait! I shouted. You're not gonna... A shot. The thud of a body. I froze. My hair stood on end. Something urged me to leave at once, to run for my life. There were sounds from the next room, a faint knocking like a heel tapping the floor, then a rustling. Then silence. Dead silence. Through the open door, I saw a trouser leg. Not taking my eyes off it, I backed towards the exit, groped for the doorknob. The hall was empty. I shut the door, pressed my back against it, There, directly across the hall, standing casually in an open doorway, a fat officer was watching me. My heart skipped a beat. That bored, indifferent expression on his face, it overwhelmed me. He took something out of his pocket, a penknife, tossed it up, caught it, once, twice, a third time, and then held it in his fist, turned his wrist. The blade sprang open with a click. He tested the edge with his thumbnail and grinned. Then he closed his eyes, nodded, stepped back into the room, and shut the door. I waited. There was the whine of an elevator, and then nothing. I listened to the blood hum in my ears, and I watched the door. Was there someone behind the keyhole? Cautiously, I started to walk. Once again, I was walking alone down endless corridors, corridors that continuously branched out and converged, corridors with dazzling walls and rows of white gleaming doors. I was exhausted, too weak to make another attempt at breaking in somewhere, finding some point of entry into the system. Now and then I leaned against a wall to catch my breath, but they were all too slippery, too perpendicular to rest on. My watch had stopped long ago. I no longer knew whether it was day or night. Sometimes I seemed to fall asleep on my feet. Then the slamming of a door somewhere or the whir of a passing elevator would wake me up. I stepped aside for people with briefcases. Now the halls were empty. Now they swarmed with officers all heading in the same direction. Work went on around the clock here. One shift left, another took its place. I remember little of the following hours. I was walking, getting on and off elevators, even holding my own in casual conversations. Didn't somebody wish me good night? But nothing made an impression on me. My mind was like a mirror, or rather like the glazed surface of porcelain. Then somehow I was outside a bathroom. I entered. Everything was bright and gleaming like an operating room in a hospital. The marble bathtub was like a sarcophagus. I sat down on the edge of it and began to doze. I made one feeble attempt to turn off the blinding light, but there was no switch. The glare from the nickel-plated fixtures was painful, bore into my eyes like fire through the lids, like needles. But I sank into that hard bed, covered my face with an arm, and drifted off. My head struck something sharp, but the pain couldn't wake me. How long I slept, I don't know. It took a while to wake up, to overcome the formless obstacles that haunted my dreams. After a struggle, I awoke and was immediately assaulted by a blast of light. A naked bulb hung high on the white ceiling. I just realized I've been here the whole time and I didn't say anything. Hi! I figured you were probably here. My bones felt like they'd taken a bad fall. I got up, stripped, and had a quick shower. On the wall was a silver dispenser of some fragrant liquid soap, and I found towels embroidered with staring eyes. I dried myself briskly, restoring the circulation, and then hurriedly dressed. For the first time in a long time, I felt fresh and confident. It was only when my hand touched the door that I remembered where I was. The realization hit me like an electric shock. An endless white labyrinth lay in wait out there. I knew, and equally endless wandering. The net of corridors, halls, and soundproof rooms, each ready to swallow me up. The thought made me break out in a cold sweat. For one mad moment, I was ready to run out screaming for help or for a quick and merciful end. But this weakness passed. I took a deep breath, lifted my head, straightened my clothes, and calmly walked out, my step firm, purposeful, in time to the rhythm of the building. I set my watch at 8, picking the hour at random, in order to keep track of at least the relative passage of time. The little frequented passageway in which I found myself soon led into the usual traffic. Around me, the office work continued. I took an elevator down on the chance that it might be breakfast time, but the cafeteria doors were shut. A cleaning crew was at work inside. I turned back and rode up to the 3rd level. The 3rd only because that button looked more worn out than the others. The corridor there was empty. Almost at the very end, just before the turn, a soldier stood guard at a door. His uniform carried no sign of any rank, which was unusual, just a white belt. The soldier held a submachine gun in his gloved hands and stood like a statue. He didn't even blink as I passed. After a few steps, I turned back to the door he was guarding. If this was indeed an official entrance to headquarters, I had little hope of getting in. On the other hand, what was there to lose? I touched the doorknob and glanced at him. He paid no attention, his gaze fixed onto the opposite wall. I entered, and was amazed to see, straight ahead, a spiral staircase. There was an unusually cold draft. I put out my hand. The chill seemed to come from above, so I started climbing. At the top, only the glass of an open door glimmered in the dimness. I found myself on the threshold of a dark chapel. Inside, under a crucifix, lay an open coffin. The flickering candles threw little light on the dead man's face. Massive benches stood on either side of the aisle, barely visible in the darkness, and beyond them were niches, their contents altogether hidden. I heard heels clicking on stone, but I could see no one. I groped up the aisle, pondering my next move, when my eyes happened to fall on the face of the dead man. It was that little old man. He lay in the casket, covered with a flag that fell to the ground in elaborate folds. His face, serene and waxen, was nestled in starched lace. The spectacles were gone. Perhaps that was why his features lacked their former look of alarm and mischief. Now he was quite solemn, as if thoroughly settled, composed. The hands were carefully arranged on either side of the flag, but one little finger had refused to bend with the rest and stuck out in a mocking or warning gesture. It called attention to itself. From high up came a single note. Then a second, with the wheeze and whine of an organ. Sounded as if some passerby had tried a few notes on the keyboard and then had given up. Again there was silence. The honors shown the dead man puzzled me. In fact, the whole situation was very odd. I stood at the foot of the casket, my feet freezing, and caught up a warm whiff of stearin. A candle wick hissed. Then there was a light tap on my shoulder and a whisper in my ear. "He's already been searched." "What?" I blurted out. The word, though certainly not shouted, set up a long and loud echo in the place. A tall officer stood nearby. His face was pale and bloated, his nose blue. A stiff white collar turned back to front shone from under the uniform lapels. Did you say something? Father?" I asked. He closed his eyes solemnly, as if to acknowledge my presence as discreetly as possible. "Oh, no, a misunderstanding. I took you for someone else. Anyway, I'm not a priest, I'm a monk." "I see." We stood a while in silence. He lowered his head. It was shaven and covered with a small skull cap. "Pardon my asking, you were acquainted with the deceased?" "In a way, though not very well," I replied. Though all I could see of his eyes were tiny reflections from the candles, it was obvious he was slowly looking me over. "Paying your last respects?" he whispered with an unpleasant familiarity, and scrutinized me even more closely. I countered with a bold, contemptuous stare. He stiffened. "You were assigned here, then?" he sighed. I said nothing. "There will be Mass," he observed piously. "Obsequies first, then Mass, if you wish." "It doesn't matter." Of course not." It was growing colder. An icy wind stirred the candles. Then something near the casket caught my eye, a large heavy air conditioner churning out freezing air through its metal grating. "Not a bad arrangement," I remarked. The monk looked quickly over his shoulder and touched my sleeve with an incredibly white, soft hand. Permit me to report," he whispered, "many cases of gross negligence, incompetency, conduct not becoming an officer. The Sergeant Prior is not performing his duties." He said this through his teeth, at the same time watching me closely, ready to retreat at any moment. But I kept silent, my eyes fixed on the shadowy dead man. This lack of response seemed to embolden the monk. "Of course, it's none of my business. I hardly dare," he breathed in my ear. "But if I might ask, in the hope that I could be of some assistance in the course of duty, your orders are from high up?" "That's right," I said. He grimaced in admiration, exposing large, horsey teeth. "Permit me, I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all." "Well, you must know that the failures of the mission are becoming so grave that—" "You're a missionary?" I asked. He smiled. "I was speaking of our division, not our dedication to the Lord." "Your division?" "The theological division. Quite recently, Father Arminian from the confidence section misappropriated—" And he went on, but I lost the thread of what he said. The dead man's little finger, the one that refused to bend with the others, was now moving. The other finger seemed carved from one piece, like a wax model of a shell, but this one, plumper and pinker than the rest, twitched back and forth, as if to express the slightly rakish character of the deceased. Yet there was something so incorporeal, so fantastically light in the motion. One thought less of resurrection and more of hummingbirds and the kind of tiny insects that appear only in a blur before us. The tremor became more and more pronounced. "Impossible!" I cried. The monk cringed and clutched me. "You have my sacred word. I speak the truth." "What? Oh, I see. Well, tell me more," I said, suddenly realizing I preferred his oppressive company to that of the dead man. Besides, the dead man wouldn't dare attempt anything more in the presence of two people. The confession files are poorly kept. There's no supervision. At least half of our plants have been spotted. Brother Lieutenant Gatekeeper is extremely careless about giving out passes and writing reports. The Holy Spirit section has completely neglected provocation activities. Angel baiting. "You don't say," I muttered. The finger was still. I knew I should leave immediately, but I didn't want to be impolite. "And how is the situation regarding the performance of religious duties?" I threw out, reluctantly playing the role of interrogator, against my better judgment, but at this point I had no choice. The monk's excitement mounted. The passion of informing was on him. He hissed, his watery eyes glittered, he foamed at the mouth. "The practice of religious duties," he said, hoarse with impatience to cast off the heavy weight of accusations he had to make. "The sermons are not effective, attendance is down, the regulations on bugging prayers are generally disregarded. This holds for all denominations, but I speak only of my own. The transgressions in the higher goal section would have led to a scandal. They were hushed up only because Brother Agent Malchus was able to supply the sexton with several willing nuns. And Chaplain Major Orfini, instead of notifying the authorities, plays with mysticism and preaches retribution not of this world." "You mean off-planet?" "If only. Oh, no, he... But excuse me, I don't even know your name." "That's all right. Of course, now, the retribution of Judgment Day, the apocalypse, that I can understand, thanks mainly to the most efficient methods our scientific colleagues have made possible. And then, to make matters worse, Malchus goes around bragging left and right that he's cracked the Bible code. Do you know what that means?" "Blasphemy?" I offered. "Blasphemy the good Lord can take care of. That's no problem. It's our whole order that's at stake, the very theological foundations for the dogma of divine desertion." Fine, I said, impatient. Let's skip the theories. This Brother Agent Malchus, what was that all about? Get to the point, brother." "As you wish. We've known for a long time that Malchus was a triple agent. The way he said his psalms, you understand. Brother Almagans checked him out, and we planted a few civilians. For instance, he was seen making certain signs while prostrate before the altar. That in itself constitutes an infraction of paragraph 14. Then in the course of the routine quarterly examination, we found silver threads sewn into his chasuble." "Silver threads? What else? For video transmission. I personally conducted an investigation among the communicants." "Thank you," I said. "That'll do. I get the picture. You may go now, brother." But I haven't begun to... "Dismissed." The monk stood at attention, about-faced, and marched off. I was left alone. So, religion here was no extracurricular activity, no harmless hobby, but another front for the usual business. The little finger twitched. I reached over and grabbed it, but it broke loose and rolled into a fold in the flag, lying there like a little pink sausage. I picked it up and examined it closely. It was an inflated membrane, the wrinkles and nail painted on in great detail. What sort of prosthetic device was this? Hearing footsteps, I quickly pocketed the object. Several people entered the chapel carrying a wreath. I retreated behind a column and watched them arrange funeral ribbons with gold letters. A priest appeared at the altar, and an acolyte adjusted his vestments. I looked over my shoulder. Beneath a bas-relief of Peter renouncing Christ was a small door. Behind the door, I found a narrow passageway that turned to the left. At the end of it, before a large alcove containing a few steps that led to a door, a monk in a cowl and sandals sat upon a three-legged stool and turned the pages of his breviary with gnarled fingers. When he lifted his eyes and looked at me, I could see that he was very old. The skull cap sat on his bald head like a patch of mud. "Where does this go?" I asked, indicating the door. Huh? He croaked, cupping his ear. Where does this door lead to? I shouted, bending over him. A flash of understanding lit his sunken face. Nowhere, it don't lead to nowhere. It's a cell, Father Marfian's cell, our hermit. What? A cell. May I see the hermit, then? I asked. The old monk nodded. Yes, this here is our hermitage. I hesitated, then walked up and opened the door to a dim antechamber, cluttered with all sorts of junk, dirty sacks, onion skins, empty jars, sausage rings, ashes, and old papers strewn about the floor. Only the center of the room had been swept, or rather there were a few clean places to put one's foot. I reached the other door, stepping gingerly through the debris, and turned a heavy iron handle. Inside there was shuffling, whispering. By the light of a single candle somewhere on the floor, I saw shadowy figures scurry about, crouch in the corners, scuttle under crooked tables or cots. Someone blew out the candle, and there were angry whispers and grunts in the darkness. The air was heavy with the stale smell of unwashed bodies. I beat a hasty retreat. When I passed the old monk, he lifted his eyes from the prayer book. Father Marfian see you? He rasped. He's sleeping, I said, and hurried on. The voice followed me down the hall. You come the first time, he's sleeping, but the second time, then you'll see. I went back through the chapel. The funeral rites were apparently over. The casket, flags, and wreaths were gone. Mass, too, was over. A priest stood in the dim pulpit and admonished the congregation. For it is written, and when the devil had ended all the temptation, he departed from him for a season. The preacher's shrill voice reverberated beneath the high domed ceiling. For a season, it is written. And where does the devil hide for a season? In that Red Sea that courses through our veins, or perhaps in nature? But, oh my brothers, are we not ourselves nature, nature without end? Does not the rustle of her trees echo in our bones? Is our human blood less salty than the waters of the sea that carve great caverns of lime and chalk, great skeletons beneath the waves? Does not the everlasting fire of the desert burn in our hearts? And are we not, in the end, a clamorous prelude to the final silence, a marriage bed to engender dust, a universe for microbes, microbes that strive to circumnavigate us? We are as unfathomable, as inscrutable as that which brought us into being, and we choke on our own enigma. You hear that? Came a whisper behind me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the sweaty, pale face of a corporal brother. Choking, yet, and that's supposed to be a provocation sermon. He doesn't know how to slip anything in. Seek not the key to the mystery, for surely it will never fit. Thou shalt not penetrate the impenetrable. Humble thyself, the voice boomed. Father Orfini's finished now. I'll call him over. He can be of use, you know, a good man to a third degree, the pale monk hissed, burning my neck with his foul breath. Some of the worshippers began to turn around and look at us. No, don't, I whispered. Too late. He was already making for the altar by a side passage. I tried to leave unobtrusively, but the exit was too crowded. The monk was already returning with the priest, now back in uniform, pulling him by the sleeve. Then, with a conspiratorial wink, he disappeared behind a column, leaving the priest and me alone in the empty chapel. You wish to make a confession, my son? He asked in a melodious voice, presenting me with the stern face of an ascetic, gray at the temples, and with a gold tooth. The gold reminded me of the little old man. No, that's all right, I said. But then a thought occurred to me, and I added, I am in need of certain information. The father confessor nodded. Very well, follow me. Behind the altar was a low door, which led into an almost black corridor. On each side stood the robed figures of saints, their faces turned to the wall. We entered a painfully bright room with an enormous safe, a black enamel cross inlaid on its stainless steel. The priest offered me a chair and went over to a table cluttered with old papers and books. Even in uniform, he looked very much a priest, the white, expressive hands like those of a concert pianist. The delicate blue veins about the forehead, the dry skin that stretched across the bones. Everything about him bespoke a stern serenity. Go ahead, he said. Do you know the man in charge of the Department of Instructions? I asked. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Major Erms, yes, I know him. And the number of his office? The priest became confused. He fingered the buttons of his uniform as if it were a cassock. Did anything... he began, but I interrupted. Now, Father, let's have the number. 9,129. But I don't understand why 9,129, I repeated, certain that this was the one number I would not forget. The priest was clearly taken aback. Excuse me, Brother Persuasion gave me to understand that... Brother Persuasion, the monk that brought you over to me? What's your opinion of him, Father? I really don't know what you mean, the priest said, still standing behind his desk. Brother Persuasion heads our handicrafts unit. Handicrafts? Ecclesiastical attire, vestments, pontificals, various literographical paraphernalia, Aspergers, thuribles, censers, etc. That's all? Well, on special order for Department SD, I believe we made a number of bugged percolators, and I know our gerontophile section produces earmuffs and miscellaneous items for our suffering senior citizens. For example, polygraph mittens. Polygraph mittens? The galvanic skin response, records their hidden movements of excitement. Then there are microphone pillows for those who talk in their sleep, and so on. But, couldn't you tell me, did Brother Persuasion say anything about me? He spoke of various things. I let it hang there. The people in the department... you might say. One moment, please. The priest hurried to the safe and, in 3 quick motions, opened the combination lock. The steel door swung aside with a clang, revealing stacks of sealed folders in all colors. Then he feverishly searched, then pounced on one. His face was covered by tiny beads of sweat. Make yourself at home. I'll be right back. Oh, no you don't, I yelled, jumping up. Hand over that folder. I did this on the spur of the moment. He clutched the folder to his chest. I looked at him in the eye and grabbed an edge of it, but he wouldn't let go. 19, I said slowly. A drop of sweat ran down his cheek like a tear. The folder eased itself into my hands. I opened it. It was empty. My duty. I acted under orders. From high up, the priest muttered. 16, I said. No, anything but that. Be seated, Father. You will not leave this room until you're given the proper authorization by phone. Is that understood? Yes, yes. Nor will you initiate any calls yourself, Father. I won't, I swear. Good. I left and closed the door, went back through the chapel and down the spiral staircase. This time there was no guard at the entrance. In the elevator, I noticed that the yellow folder taken from the priest was still in my hand. Room 9129 was on the 9th level, sure enough. I entered without knocking. One of the secretaries was knitting, the other worked on a ham sandwich and a cup of coffee. I looked for a door to the chief's office. There wasn't any, which was odd. Major Erms, special mission, I announced. The secretaries acted as if they hadn't heard me. The one who was knitting counted stitches under her breath. A code? I examined the small room more carefully. Rows of bookshelves on every wall, bookshelves and file cabinets, microphone painted like a flower, and hanging above one shelf at an unusual height. Without another word, I placed my yellow folder on the desk in front of the girl with the ham sandwich. She glanced at it, chewing. Pale pink gums showed above her teeth. With the little finger of her left hand, she pushed back the wax paper that held her sandwich. A secret sign? I walked along the shelves and noticed a gap between 2 cabinets, something white. A door. There was a door behind one of the bookshelves. I gripped the shelf and pulled hard. The files above my head swayed dangerously. 16, 19. The knitting secretary counted in a whisper that became suddenly shrill. The shelf caught on something halfway, but I had access to the door and managed to turn the knob and squeeze through. End of chapter 3. All right. This guy's getting the hang of it. This guy's figuring out how to get around in this place. I like him. I like him for now. Yeah. Oh, great news, guys. I've just been informed by Streamlabs. New animated overlays for Final Fantasy 16 streams. So, you got that to look forward to. Oh, just like stretch. The game looked kind of good when I saw that first announcement trailer. I haven't seen anything of it since then. I don't know when it comes out or anything, but it looked pretty awesome. You know, I mean, I may not be the biggest Final Fantasy guy that ever lived, but like, I know all the classic guys when I see them. I know Ifrit, and I know Shiva. You know, I know whatever the guy that starts with a B is. What's that guy? But tip of my tongue. What's that guy? The big... Ifrit is the fire one. Shiva's the ice one. What's the... Oh, it's killing me right now. Wait, you're not the biggest Final Fantasy fan that ever lived? I like Final Fantasy. I like it. I really, you know, played a lot of Final Fantasy 7. I still got to finish it. Bahamut. Thank you. See, that, we have a genius in chat. I knew she would get it. We have a genius in chat. I like the tactics games quite a bit. But I'm really good at starting Final Fantasy games. I'm very, very bad at finishing them. But 16 looks cool. I'm going to keep an eye on that. Chapter 4. Oh my God, why do I keep closing my... 16's a damn PS5 exclusive. Yeah, but most games that are PS5 exclusives don't stay that way for long. I mean, I guess that's, you know, you don't want to be telling that to a freaking Demon Souls remake fanboy, but most of the time they make it onto fucking Epic or something. And Final Fantasy is like such a PC ports for Final Fantasy at this point, I feel like, are very, very much precedent. You know, after they come out, right? 7 Remake was like a year or 2 years after the console exclusive. It was on Epic. Crisis Core Remake, I think, launched on both at once. They're definitely moving in on PC, I feel like. Probably because the PS5 is selling way below expectations. Okay, wait. We're here to read a book. Chapter 4. So you decided to show up at last. A young, vibrant voice greeted me. A blonde officer got up from behind his mahogany desk. The room was stifling hot, and he was in his shirt sleeves. You're a little dirty from the wall. He took out a small brush and applied it to the sleeve of my jacket as he talked. I expected you yesterday. You will be able to spend the night, won't you? Oh, my work kept me in the office all day, but at least this way I couldn't miss you. There, now you look fine. You know, I've become so familiar with your case here that I'm treating you like an old friend, and we haven't even been introduced. I'm Erms. And you have my instructions, I said. Why else would I be here? Coffee? Thanks. He poured me a cup, threw the brush in a drawer, and took a seat. The smile never left his face. He had the winsome air of a tow-headed boy, though when I looked closer I saw wrinkles around those bright blue eyes. Laugh lines, no doubt. His teeth were like a puppy's, clean and sharp. Okay, down to business. Your instructions. Now, let's see, where did I put them? Just don't tell me you have to leave the room to get them, I said with a strained smile. This sent him into such gales of laughter that tears streamed from his eyes. He had to loosen his tie. Terrific! What a clown! Oh, but I really don't have to go anywhere to get them. They're right here. And he went over to a small safe, took out a thick bundle of papers, and tossed it on the desk. No use kidding you, the old boy gave you a tough nut to crack. Won't be a picnic. And it's your first, isn't it? That's right, I admitted, and then added, since he seemed such a decent guy, you know, if I stayed around here long enough, I could become a pro at this game without actually going on a single mission. I mean, it's in the air. You take it in. You absorb the... I couldn't find the right word. The local color, he said, and again broke into loud laughter. I laughed too, feeling light and happy as I stirred my coffee. Yet there was some unpleasant association connected with this stirring, something recent I couldn't remember. May I see my instructions? I asked. They're all yours. He pushed the bundle to me across the desk. Just a second, he said in a low voice, gentle but insistent, just as I began to read. Perhaps we should first take care of certain formalities. An ugly, bureaucratic term, I know, but you'll cooperate, won't you? Formalities? I had a sinking feeling. Isn't there a call you ought to make? He suggested discreetly. Of course, I completely forgot. That priest in the theological department. May I use your phone? Don't bother. I already took care of that for you. You did? But how? Forget it. It's nothing. But wasn't there something else? I can't think of anything. Unless you want me to make a report. If you like, but I don't insist. Major Erms, was this whole thing a test? A test? Oh, some sort of entrance exam, I mean. The abilities of a novice might be questioned, so they might want to, you know, set up certain situations. Really? Apparently I had hurt his feelings. He sounded injured, grieved. Tests? Entrance exams? Setting up situations? How could you think of such a thing? No, what I had in mind was... You took something there, didn't you? Something for me? How absent-minded. My confusion amused him. Come now, it was in the chapel. You have it with you. It's right in your pocket, isn't it? Oh, that! I pulled out the painted membrane finger and handed it over. Fine, he said. This will be added to the evidence against him. What's in it? I asked. He raised the pink sausage to the light. It was empty like a balloon. Proof of ostentation, a damaging entry in his dossier. The old man? Of course. But he's dead. So, it was clearly a hostile act. You were a witness, right there on the flag. But he's dead. He chuckled. My dear boy, wouldn't we be in fine shape if death excused everything? Oh, but enough of that. I want to thank you for your cooperation. Now, let's get back to business. Before you start out, we have to go through some things. What exactly? Oh, nothing unpleasant, I assure you. Routine induction. Propadeutics. Propadeutics. Are you familiar, for example, with the basic codes you'll have to use? No, I guess not. You see? Now, there are calling codes, stalling codes, departmental codes, special codes, and you'll like this, he grinned. They're changed every day. A necessary precaution, but what a bother. Each section, of course, has its own system, so the same word or name will have different meanings on different levels. Even names? Sure, if you could only see the look on your face, he laughed. Take the official name of our commander-in-chief, for example. Haven't you noticed all the names of his staff have a certain ring to them? True. There, you see? He grew serious. Grade, rank, even greetings. Everything is coded. Greetings? Certainly. Suppose you're talking with someone over the phone, someone on the outside, and you say, for instance, good evening. From that alone, one can deduce that our work goes on at night, that there are shifts, in other words, which is important. That our work goes on at night, that there are shifts, in other words, which is important information for someone. He stressed the last word. Every conversation. Wait, you mean even now? He cleared his throat, embarrassed. Unavoidable. Then, how am I to understand? He looked straight at me. Why do you say that? He said, lowering his voice. Of course you understand. You must. Completely forgot. Can't think of anything. Some sort of entrance exam. How could you not understand? But I can see that you do. Now why that look of despair? Each one codes according to his ability and mission. Don't worry, you'll catch on soon enough. If you say so. Have a little confidence in yourself. Business is business, I know. The impersonal routine, the complications, frustrations. Yet your mission is so fantastically difficult that it's silly to let a few little mistakes discourage you, even if they are irreparable. I'll direct you to the Department of Codes. They'll tell you everything you need to know. Nothing rigorous, you understand, just enough to handle a social conversation. And the instructions will be waiting for you here. I didn't even get a chance to look at him. No one's stopping you. I opened the bundle and glanced at the top of the first page. You won't be able to find the right room. None of them will have the number designated on your pass. First you will wind up at the Department of Verification, then the Department of Misinformation, then some clerk from the pressure section will advise you to try level 8, but on level 8 they will ignore you. I skipped a few pages and read, You will have suspected for some time now that the Cosmic Command, obviously no longer able to supervise every assignment on an individual basis when there are literally trillions of matters in its charge, has switched over to a random system. The assumption will be that every document circulating endlessly from desk to desk must eventually hit upon the right one. What is this? I stammered, looking up at Major Erms, paralyzed with a sudden stab of fear. Code, he answered absently, searching for something at his desk. Instructions have to be in code. But this sounds like... I couldn't finish. Code should sound like anything but code. Reaching across the desk, he lifted the instructions from my hands. I couldn't take them with me? Whatever for? His voice registered genuine surprise. They could help me decipher them in that Department of Codes. He laughed. What an amateur. Oh, but you'll learn. After a while, these things become second nature. Look, how could you allow your instructions to end up in anyone else's hands? Remember, only 3 people know about your mission. The Commander-in-Chief, the Chief Commander, and myself. I watched meekly as he put the bundle back inside the safe and spun the combination dials a few times. But at least tell me what my mission is about, I urged. Give me a rough idea. A rough idea. He bit his lip. An unruly shock of hair fell into his left eye. He leaned against the desk with his fingertips, whistled softly like a schoolboy, then heaved a sigh and smiled. There was a dimple in his left cheek. What on earth am I going to do with you? He shrugged, went back to the safe, and took out the same bundle, and asked, You have a folder, I believe? We'll stuff the lot in there. The empty yellow folder I brought with me, but had left outside, now turned up on his desk, and he filled it with my instructions. There you are, he said, handing it over with a broad grin. Your instructions, and in a yellow folder yet. The color signifies something? My innocence amused him. Does it signify something, he asks. That's great. But no more jokes. Let's be off. I'll show you the way. I hurried after him, holding the heavy folder in tightly under my arm. We went through an office as large and long as a classroom. On the walls above the heads of the clerical staff were blueprints of aqueducts and dams, and above those, almost at the ceiling, huge maps of the Red Planet. I recognized the canals at once. Major Erms opened a door for me, and we passed between rows of desks. No one looked up from his work. Another room, an enormous chart representing the body of a rat, and rat skeletons in glass cages, looking like empty walnuts tied together with wire. The walls curved. Around the bend, several people peered into microscopes, each surrounded by slides, tweezers, jars of glue. Further on, people were ironing out and meticulously assembling tiny bits of dirty paper. There was a sharp smell of chlorine in the air. By the way, said Major Erms in a confidential whisper when we were walking alone down a white corridor, if you ever need to throw anything away, an unimportant document, a note, or a rough draft of something, never use the toilet for that purpose. It only makes unnecessary work for our people. How come? I asked. He frowned impatiently. Must everything be spelled out for you? That was the Department of Sanitation we just passed. I use it as a shortcut. All our drain pipes are monitored, the sewage carefully filtered, every bit of it before it can be cleared. These are, after all, roads to the outside, hence potential information leaks. Ah, our elevator. It opened, and an officer in a trench coat stepped out with a violin case tucked under his arm. He asked us if we would mind waiting while he moved his packages off the elevator. Suddenly there was a loud bang quite close. He leaped from the elevator, tossed his packages at us, and dashed up the corridor, frantically opening the violin case. One package caught me in the chest, and I fell back against the closing elevator door. The chatter of an automatic began around the corner. Something cracked overhead, and a cloud of chalky dust came down the walls. "Down! Down!" yelled Major Erms, pulling my arm. We hit the floor together. The corridor thundered from one end to the other. Bullets whined above our heads. Plaster sprinkled down. The officer fell. His violin case flew open. Confetti came swirling out like snow. The smell of gunpowder seared our nostrils. A small capsule was pressed into my hand. "When I give the signal, put that between your teeth and bite," Major Erms shouted in my ear. Someone was running. A deafening explosion. Major Erms pulled out several envelopes, stuffed them into his mouth, and chewed like mad, spitting out stamps as if they were pits. Another explosion, a grenade. The fallen officer gave the death rattle. His left leg beat against the hard floor. Erms counted the kicks, got up and gave a cheer. "Ha! 2 plus 5! We won!" He sprang to his feet, dusted himself off, and handed me the folder. "Come on, we'll try to get you some meal tickets." "What was all that about?" I gasped, still shaken. The dying man kicked the floor twice, 5 times, twice, 5 times. "That? An unmasking. And now we just leave." "Sure, this," he pointed to the twitching body, "is not our department. But Section 7 will take care of him. There, you see, here come the theologicals." A chaplain approached, preceded by an altar boy ringing a Sanctus bell. As we entered the elevator, I could still hear the dying man's coded agony. At the 10th level, Major Erms held out his hand instead of getting off. "Well?" "Well, what?" "The capsule." "Oh, here it is." I was clutching it in my hand. He put it in his wallet. What was it?" "Nothing." He let me out first, and we headed for the nearest door. A fat officer sat by a table in a perfectly square room, munching candy from a paper bag. Other than that, there was only a very small black door, barely large enough for even a child. "Where's Prantl?" asked Major Erms. The officer, still chewing, held up 3 fingers. His uniform was unbuttoned. He seemed to pour out over his chair. His face was bloated, his neck full of folds, and he wheezed terribly when he breathed. "Good," said Major Erms. "Prantl will be here any minute. Make yourself at home. He'll take good care of you. And whenever you have a free moment, drop in for those meal tickets. Be seeing you." After he left, I took a seat by the wall and watched the fat man. The candy crunched in his teeth. The lips smacked. I looked away, afraid he might have a stroke right before my eyes. The skin around his neck was awfully blue, and his breathing came in great, tortured gasps. This was apparently normal for the man. He hardly seemed to notice. He fought for breath. He munched candy. I wanted to grab the paper bag from his hands. He stuffed himself, one candy after another, swallowing hard, turning red and then purple. The sticky fingers reached for another. I looked away, but I couldn't turn my back on him altogether. I was afraid he might choke to death behind my back, and I didn't want a corpse behind me. I closed my eyes and tried to think. Had my situation improved or not? Apparently it had, but then there were so many buts. For instance, Major Erms had been quite prepared to poison me. I had no doubts about the contents of that capsule. But then there was the little old man in the gold spectacles. Chances were I wasn't free of him yet. But my big worry was the instructions. They duplicated to the letter my every step inside the building, more my every thought. This indicated I was still under observation, though Erms had vehemently denied that. However, he later admitted that our conversation was not to be taken literally, that everything was in code, an allusion to other meanings, hidden meanings, meanings on different levels. But this was not what really bothered me. I was beginning to doubt the very existence of the instructions themselves. Of course, that was utter nonsense. Why would they observe me and subject me to all these tests if I were not on a special mission, if I were not of great importance to them? Clearly, I was no earthly use to anyone without this assignment. This assignment, which had come so unexpectedly, so mysteriously, in which they had sometimes suspended, sometimes half-heartedly confirmed. If I could ask them one question, just one question, it would be, what do you want me to do? Zim asked that too. Yeah, Invader Zim be like, and any answer would be welcome. Any answer at all except one. The officer startled me with a loud snort. He blew his nose and examined the handkerchief carefully before folding it and putting it away. The door opened and a tall, gaunt officer walked in. Something about him, couldn't quite put my finger on it, gave the impression of a civilian disguised in a uniform. He took off his glasses and twirled them as he approached. "You wanted to see me?" "Mr. Prannell from the Department of Codes?" I asked, getting up. "Except that I'm a captain. Remain seated. Interested in codes, huh?" The last syllable was aimed like a shot between my eyes. "Yes, Captain." "Don't call me Captain. Coffee?" "Please." The small black door swung open, and a hand placed a tray with 2 cups of coffee before us. Prannell put it on his glasses, and his features froze into a hard, fierce expression. "Define code," he snapped, like a hammer on metal. Code is a system of signs which can be translated into ordinary language with the help of a key." "The smell of a rose. Code or not?" "Not a code because it's not a sign for anything. It's merely itself a smell. Only if it were used to signify something else would we consider it a code." I was glad of this opportunity to demonstrate my ability to think logically. The fat officer leaned over in my direction until his buttons began to pop. I ignored him. Prannell took off his glasses and smiled. "The rose, does it smell just because or for a reason?" "Oh, it attracts bees with its smell. The bees pollinate it." He nodded. "Precisely. Now let's generalize. The eye converts a light wave into a neural code, which the brain must decipher. And the light wave, from where does it come? A lamp? A star? That information lies in its structure. It can be read." "But that's not a code," I interrupted. "A star or a lamp doesn't attempt to conceal information, which is the whole purpose of a code." "Oh?" "Obviously, it all depends on the intention of the sender." I reached for my coffee. A fly was floating in it. Had the fat officer placed it there? I glanced at him. He was picking his nose. I fished the fly out with my spoon and let it drop on the saucer. It clinked. Metal, sure enough. "The intention?" Prannell put on his glasses. The other officer, I was keeping an eye on him, began to rummage through his pockets, wheezing so violently that his face moved like a bunch of balloons. "Take a light wave," Prannell continued, "emitted by a star. What kind of star? Big or little, hot or cold? What's its history, its future, its chemical composition? Can we, or can we not, tell all this from its light?" Well, we can with the proper know-how." "And the proper know-how?" "Yes. That's the key, isn't it?" "Still," I said carefully, "light is not code." "It isn't?" "I mean, the information it carries wasn't hidden there. And besides, using your argument, we'd have to conclude that everything is code." "And so it is. Absolutely everything. Code or camouflage, yourself included." "You're joking." "Not at all. I'm a code. Or camouflage. Every code is a camouflage. Not every camouflage is a code." "Perhaps," I said, following it through. "If you're thinking about genetics, heredity, those programs of ourselves we carry around in every cell. In that way, I'm a code for my progeny, my descendants. But camouflage? What would I have to do with camouflage?" "You," Prannell replied dryly, "are not in my jurisdiction." He went over to the small black door. A hand appeared with a piece of paper, which he turned over to me. "Threat outflanking maneuver stop," it read. Reinforcements, Sector 7, 9431, stop. Quartermaster 7th Operational Group, Gansmerst. Cold, DIPL, stop. I looked up. Another fly was floating in my coffee. The fat officer yawned. Well? Asked Prantle. His voice seemed far away. I pulled myself together. A telegram. A deciphered telegram. No, it's in code. We have yet to crack it. But it looks like camouflage, he said. They used to camouflage codes as innocent information, private letters, poems, etc. Now each side tries to make the other believe that the message isn't coded at all. You follow? I guess. Now here's the text run through our DEC machine. He went back to the small black door, pulled a piece of paper from the fingers there, and gave it to me. Babiro Santo Satori, Impeclinical Ballistic Matotiosis, ain't catasiftically ambergatory, nor faragrant graphically oscillumptious by retrovasilification neither, I read, and stared at him. That's deciphered? He smiled tolerantly. The second stage, he explained. The code was designed to yield gibberish upon any attempt to crack it. This is to convince us that the telegram wasn't coded in the first place, that the original message can be taken at face value. But it can't? He nodded. Watch. I'll run it through again. A piece of paper dropped from the hand in the small black door. Something red moved around inside, but Prantle got in the way, so I couldn't see. I picked up the paper. It was still warm, either from the hand or from the machine. Abruptive celebration of all dervishes carrying Bibugish pyrites via Termand. Highly recommended. That was the text. I shook my hand. Now what? I asked. The machine has done what it can. Now we take over. And he yelled, Cruh! Huh? The fat officer groaned, suddenly jolted from his stupor. He turned his bleary eyes to Prantle. Prantle bellowed, Abrupt acceleration. There, croaked the fat officer. All dervishes. We. Be, he bleated. Bebuggish pyrites. Nah, wah. Termand. Sir. Saliva trickled down his chin. When, sir. He broke into wild laughter, which ended in a fit of horrible gurgling. The face turned a deep purple. Tears streamed down his cheeks. His body was racked with sobs. Enough, Kroof, enough, yelled Prantle. An error, he said, turning to me. False association, but you still heard the entire text. Text? What text? There will be no answer. The fat officer sat back in his chair, trembling. Little by little he quieted down and, moaning softly to himself, caressed his face with both hands, as if to comfort it. There will be no answer? I repeated. Hadn't I heard those words recently? But where? Is that all it says? I asked Prantle. He gave a twisted smile. If I were to show you a text richer in meaning, we might both regret it later on. Even so, I flared up, as if that careless remark somehow concerned me vitally. Prantle shrugged. This was a sample of our latest code, not too complicated, in multiple camouflage. He was clearly trying to divert my attention from that slip. I wanted to get back to it, but all I could say was, according to you, everything is code. Correct. In that case, every text? Yes. A literary text? Certainly. Come with me. He motioned me over to the small black door. There was no other room inside, only the dark surface of a machine, a small keyboard, a nickel-plated slot from which a piece of printout tape curled like a reptile tongue. "Give me a line from some literary work," Prandtl said, turning to me. Shakespeare? Whatever you like." "You maintain that his plays are nothing but coded messages?" "Depends on what you mean by a coded message, but let's give it a try, shall we?" I tried to think, but nothing came to me except Othello's "excellent wretch." It seemed a bit brief and inappropriate. "I've got it," I announced with sudden inspiration. "My ears have not yet drunk 100 words of that tongue's utterance, yet I know the sound. Art thou not Romeo and a Montague?" "Fine." Prandtl had hardly typed this out when the tape began to move from the slot, a paper snake. He gently handed the end of it to me, and I waited patiently while the printout emerged. The vibration of the machine suddenly stopped, and the rest of the tape came out blank. I read, "Bastard Matthews, var let Matthews, scum would bash that flap ear ass with pleasure, great that Matthews bass." "What is this?" I asked, perplexed. Prandtl gave me a knowing nod. "Shakespeare evidently harbored a grudge against someone by the name of Matthews and chose to put this in code when he wrote those lines." "What? You mean he deliberately used that beautiful scene to disguise a lot of foul language directed at Matthews?" "Who says he did it deliberately? A code is a code, regardless of the author's intention." "Let's see something," I said, and typed the decoded text into the machine myself. The tape moved again, spiraling onto the floor. Prandtl smiled and said nothing. "If only she'd give me tra-la-la, tra-la-la, if only tra-la-la, she'd give me la-la, tra-la-la, and give me tra-la-la, ha-ha-ha, tra-la-la," went the letters of the printout. "Now, what do you make of it?" "We have moved deeper into the 17th century Englishman's psyche." "What? Trying to tell me that Shakespeare's great poetry is nothing but Bastard Matthews and tra-la-la? At that rate, your machine will reduce our monuments of literature, creations of genius, immortal works, all to complete gibberish." "Precisely," answered Prandtl. "Gibberish. The arts, literature, what's their true purpose? Diversion." "Diversion from what?" "You don't know?" "No." "You should." I was silent. A cracked code remains a code. An expert can peel away layer after layer. It's inexhaustible. One digs ever deeper into more and more inaccessible strata. The journey has no end. "How can this be? What about there will be no answer? Didn't you say that was the final result?" "No, it was only a stage. Real enough within the framework of those proceedings, but a stage nonetheless. Give it some thought and you'll come to the same conclusion." I don't understand." "You will in good time. Yet even that will be but another stage." "Couldn't you help me a little?" "You're on your own, as everyone is. It's tough to be sure, but you've been singled out. You know the score. We're out of time now. In the future, I'll do what I can for you. In the line of duty, of course." "But how? I still don't know," I said in alarm. "Weren't you supposed to brief me on codes for the mission?" "Mission?" "Yes." "Specify it." Well, I don't have the details. I assume it's all spelled out in my instructions. Here, they're in this folder. Of course, I'm not allowed to show you." "Hold on, where's my folder?" I jumped up, looked under the table. The folder was gone. The officer, bloated and gaping like a dead fish, snored heavily on his seat. "Where's my folder?" I shouted in his ear. Easy, Prandtl said behind my back. Nothing gets lost here. Cruh! Cruh! He scolded. Give it back, do you hear? Give it back! The officer shifted his weight, and something fell to the floor. My folder. I grabbed it, checked to see if it was still full. Had he been sitting on it then? If he swiped it right from under my nose, he was more dexterous than he looked. I was about to open the folder when I remembered that I couldn't read my instructions properly without the key, and that Prandtl couldn't give me the key unless he knew what they were about. A vicious circle. I explained it to him. Probably an oversight on Major Erms's part, I concluded. Who knows, he said. I'll check it out, I said, challenging him. In other words, I'll go to him and tell him you're washing your hands of the whole affair, that you're sabotaging my mission, a mission assigned by the Commander-in-Chief himself. Do whatever you think is right, he said, and then added with a shade of hesitation. But are you sure you know the proper procedure? The same procedure that has me leave here empty-handed, I asked coolly. Prandtl took off his glasses. His face, as if suddenly unmasked, assumed a look of weary helplessness. I sensed that he wanted to tell me something but couldn't, or wasn't allowed. The hostility which had been mounting between us was suddenly dispelled. I began to feel sympathy for this man. You're acting under orders? He asked in such a small voice that I could hardly hear him. Under orders? I guess. I am too. He opened the door and stood there like a statue, waiting for me to leave. As I passed him, his lips parted, but the word remained unspoken. He only sighed, stepped back, and slammed the door in my face. Once again, I found myself in the corridor, clutching my folder. But if my visit to the Department of Codes had not brought the desired results, that is, to tell me something of my mission, at least this time I had a destination. That in itself was something. I repeated the number to myself, 9129. I would ask Major Erms for the meal tickets he promised me. A good pretext. I passed several white doors before I remembered the folder. If my instructions, I had to assume they existed, continued in the vein of the excerpts I had read in Major Erms's office, then they would trace all my future movements through the building. A staggering thought. And yet wherever I went, there were indications that others knew more about my aimless wanderings from room to room than I myself. Could it be that the folder really held a complete itinerary of my journey, including what lay in store for me at its conclusion? The few lines I already read certainly suggested that possibility. Even my innermost thoughts had been accurately recorded. I decided to open the folder, wondering only why I hadn't done it before. If I indeed held my fate in my own two hands, why not take a peek? That's the end of Chapter 4, and that's where we're stopping tonight. Fun, more fun. I hope everybody's enjoying it. I like Prandtl. Prandtl is he's great. What did you asked me something earlier? Let me look for it. How long ago was this written? I think I know the answer, but let me not lie to you. Published in 1961, published in English in 1973. Thanks so much for hanging out with me tonight. What was the original language? Polish. It's published in Polish in 1961. And Trump still flushed documents. He still flushed them. He clearly read the book. I mean, everything about him. All right, I'm not going to start doing a character. Not when the recording's on, obviously.